Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Enabling Change, How Wiki Education is Tackling Disability on Wikipedia. I'm Helaine Blumenthal. I'm Senior Program Manager here at Wiki Education, and I'm joining you all today from the beautiful Bay Area, where we're having some lovely spring weather. Before we kind of jump in here, as people are joining the webinar, please feel free, if you want to, put in the chat where you're joining us from today. It's always fun to see in these virtual events where people are coming from. I'm really excited about today's session. Just for full disclosure, I am blind myself, and so while this session today has a lot of professional meaning to me, it also has a lot of personal significance as well. I want to thank all of our incredible panelists for being here today. They're going to introduce themselves momentarily. A couple of logistics. The session is being recorded, so if you have to duck out in the middle of the session, we will be recording it and you'll be able to access that recording after the session is done. We also will be leaving time for Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to put any questions into that Q&A section on Zoom. And my colleague Colleen, our communications outreach coordinator, will be facilitating the Q&A session at the end. So thanks in advance, Colleen. Before I jump into the actual questions in the roundtable session here today, I want to make sure that everybody knows who Wiki Education is and what we do. Wiki Education is a small nonprofit organization, and broadly speaking, our mission is to improve content on Wikipedia by engaging and working with subject matter experts, scholars, and students at post-secondary institutions, as well as cultural institutions like museums, archives, libraries, etc. And we do this all in the hopes of making reliable information open and accessible to a global audience. And while we address every content area, really every subject matter under the sun, you could say, we do have a driving force at Wikipedia to tackle what's called Wikipedia's knowledge equity gaps. And that's filling in content on Wikipedia around populations and subjects that have been either historically underrepresented, misrepresented, or often totally left out of the record altogether. We do this through two different programs at Wiki Education. So the first is the Wikipedia Student Program. That's our largest program, where we work with faculty at post-secondary institutions in the US and in Canada who have their students write for Wikipedia as course assignments. And our second program is the Wikipedia Scholars and Scientists program, and that's where we run virtual training classes where we train subject matter experts and scholars on how to contribute to Wikipedia themselves. And what's really nice here is that among our panelists today, we actually have people that have participated in both our Wikipedia student program and our scholars program. So we'll kind of get both perspectives, which I think will be really great. Okay. And then, of course, at the end here, we'll also pass some links on and how you all can get involved in Wiki Education's programmatic efforts. Okay, with that, we're going to jump in here. So again, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Can you all briefly introduce yourselves? Tell us your name, your role, and where you're joining us from today. Ryan, would you mind starting us off?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Easterly. I serve as Executive Director of the WIT Foundation, and we are headquartered in San Mateo, California, where I join you from today.
Oh my goodness, Ryan, I'm in San Mateo. I didn't know that you were here. That's a funny coincidence. Okay.
Well, hello, Nova.
Well, hello, neighbor. This is what happens in this virtual world. You never know where people are actually based. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Diana, why don't you go?
I am Diana Boling, and I am a senior teaching faculty from Xavier University. And the university is in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm just outside of there in Batavia, Ohio.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, Terri.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Dr. Terri Hlava here with Montreux, and we are at Arizona State University, where we teach disability studies, ethnic studies, and some other kind of thing, justice studies. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Terri and Motro. And Skylar, how about you?
Hi, I'm Dr. Skylar Covich. I'm the technology program lead at the Braille Institute, and I live in Santa Barbara, California. I also have a doctorate in political science before I made a career change. And before all that, as a teenager, I was the first blind administrator on the English Wikipedia. So I'm not as active as an editor now, but definitely have a long history with the free knowledge movement.
Thank you so much to all of you again for being here today. Okay, so before we kind of proceed into the meat here, I think it's important for everybody to kind of understand where you're coming from. So you're all clearly coming from very different backgrounds. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves and specifically how you've become involved in disability communities? Here, why don't we can go in reverse order here. Skylar, why don't we start with you?
Great. So again, I'm Skylar, and I've been blind since birth. I have Leber's congenital amaurosis, and it was actually, in fact, just looking up that article on Wikipedia, which is fairly solid. And so I've been involved in a variety of different blindness organizations, the National Federation of the Blind. I'm also on the Santa Barbara City Access Advisory Board, which is by appointment of City Council. And in the past few years, I've actually started to work in the blindness field more professionally through my position at the Braille Institute.
Awesome. Thank you, Skylar. Terri, how about you? How have you come to be involved in the disability community?
Well, thanks. So I had some vision loss a few years ago, and it kind of snuck up on me and invited me into the disability community that way. Now at ASU, we serve on the School of Social Transformation's Disability Certificate Advisory Board and a couple of other advisory boards across the university dealing with faculty accommodations and student disability issues as well.
And thanks, Terri and Montreux. And Diana, how about you?
Thanks.
So I'm a registered nurse, and my specialty is psychiatric mental health nursing. And over the course of my career, working both at the bedside and being an educator, I've worked with several folks who have had invisible disabilities. I have a mental illness myself, and so that is one way that I've entered into learning more about disability. And really, much of my journey has been fueled by curiosity. Where can I show up better? How can I be a better nurse? How can I be a better neighbor or human? So that's my foray into this field.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Diana. Okay, and Ryan, how about you?
For me, first I was born with cerebral palsy, but then I later also acquired a mental health diagnosis. And when talking about my journey, I also think it's important to reference that not every person with a disability embraces being an advocate and has a formal role in disability advocacy. In my case, I'm very much rooted in advocacy and in disability work. So I began my first kind of foray into formal disability advocacy when I was in high school. And then when I was at university, I started a disability advocacy group while in university. And then from there, my career and advocacy work has continued to how I sit before you today as having worked about 15 years in disability inclusive grant making.
Thanks, Ryan. And that's an excellent point. And actually, like my own background, as I mentioned, I'm blind, but I'm actually not directly involved in any kind of advocacy. Although I can kind of consider the work that I do at Wiki Education to be maybe a little bit in that field, but it's a great point. Okay, and so obviously we're here to talk about Wikipedia today and the ways in which that you've all sort of participated in Wikipedia in one way or another. So could you briefly tell us a little bit about your relationship to or experience with Wikipedia thus far? I'll change it up. Diana, why don't we start with you?
All right. Thank you. So I had signed up for a webinar to learn how to edit a page geared toward updating information about disability. And what I had selected was treatments for disability, and it was a historical page, and really, I'm trying to think of how to say this. It was a lot of crossover between disability and mental illness. And so that is something that I'm particularly interested in, of course. And I updated some posts to include more information about the Willard facility that was located in upstate New York, and then also updated some information about historical treatments of mental illness and disability.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana. And Terri, how about you? How did you kind of come to Wikipedia?
So we have this genius colleague, Dr. Tracy Perkins, who was, she had given a presentation about Wikipedia and how she used it in her class. And then, I really do think she's a genius. So I asked her more about it, and she came to my class and helped my students get started. She explained everything to them the first time around, and helped make sure that they all got their pages started and that they signed up and all of that. And from there, we just kept going. So my students really loved their opportunities there. And so we try to get a little bit better at it each time we go.
Awesome. Thanks. Ryan, how about you, your relationship to or experience with Wikipedia?
I think at the start of my relationship, it was kind of the typical average person's relationship with Wikipedia, in that I viewed it as a place to, oh, if I don't know about something, let me quickly see what Wikipedia says. Or, I don't know this person. Do they have a Wikipedia page? So I think that was the origins of my relationship, that it was an information resource. But since then, we've been in relationship with the Scholars and Scientists program, and I have just been so continually impressed with the work that you're able to do through that program and the ways that you're enhancing the healthcare information that's available. I'm just so pleased that we can support the work. So I would say my relationship has grown, but I think the origins were kind of the typical person's origins.
Yeah, and I think that's true for many people, myself included, who come to this organization. And Skylar, how about you? You're a little bit different here, I think.
Yes, definitely. So I was a teenager in 2003, and I, again, was totally blind, but I had my own computer and spent a lot of time on the internet. And I discovered Wikipedia as what seemed like a really promising potential source of information. But at that time, it had been founded in 2001, and there were still some huge gaps. Like, for example, as a politics nerd already at that young age, I noticed that about half the US senators did not have articles yet. So I decided to just start creating articles about anyone that like was interested in that didn't have articles. I would just Google information about them and input it into Wikipedia. At this time, you didn't even need to have an account in order to create new articles. And you didn't have to even add any references, which is policies that were eventually changed, and for good reason. But it made it a lot easier for me to start editing. And a few people guided me along the way. People would just write messages on my talk page if I was making formatting errors. And I eventually learned by doing it, because I think people were grateful that I was finally adding some of these new articles. And so within a year or so, I was an admin on Wikipedia, a much easier process than what it is now. And because it was so easy to edit, there was a significant amount of vandalism and people creating completely trash new pages. So I started being a new pages patroller, and throughout high school and college, I deleted, I think, about 10,000 pages uh, through the speedy deletion criteria. And then in about 2009, I curtailed my editing a bit. One reason was that I was starting grad school and just generally having a busier life. But as the process for adding references became more difficult, and then you were expected to learn a lot more significant coding in order to successfully add references. I found that a lot more difficult. And there are things that I could have potentially done about it, but again, life was getting busier, and I decided it was time to take a bit of a break. And so I kept my account, I kept my admin powers, but only edited sporadically for about 10 years. And then in 2019, there was more of an effort to gather the other blind editors into a group chat. And so it turned out there was another blind administrator in Australia, and got talking to him more. And over the years, we eventually started making more connections, including with Helaine here at Wiki Education. And so I am more of an occasional editor, but with a lot of background information about the history of Wikipedia, and definitely an avid reader of Wikipedia. And I have not successfully guided anyone else in editing Wikipedia. Our group chat, which is known as Wiki Blind, has had aspirations to do that, but it just has not been done yet. And I hope that we'll have time to potentially look into how that might work, because I think there are some promising developments, possibly with AI, to make adding references a lot easier.
Oh my goodness, you touched on so many amazing points, Skylar, and I think, Skylar, we're gonna get back to those. For those of you who are unsure of some of the terms that Skylar used about Wikipedia, Wikipedia is a pretty complex environment with lots of policies and regulations, and Skylar alluded to a bunch of them. All that is to say that it's a community that has its barriers to joining, which is actually why Wiki Education exists, is to actually kind of introduce folks to these norms and these policies in this community, and make it a little bit easier to kind of overcome some of the hurdles to contributing to Wikipedia. Okay, awesome. Thanks to everybody again. Okay, but now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I've got specific questions for each of you that I hope will kind of touch on some of the ways in which you've engaged with Wikipedia. Ryan, this first one is for you. So your organization, the WITH Foundation, funds projects that work on intellectual and developmental disability and healthcare. And some, on the face of it, the work that we do here at Wiki Education doesn't necessarily kind of like fit into I think a lot of the other projects that you guys fund. So I was wondering if you could tell us, as a strategic grant partner, how you think the work of Wiki Education advances the mission of the WITH Foundation, and kind of generally speaking, how our approach to information access fits into the WITH Foundation's broader vision.
I'm happy to. So like you said, from our perspective, our funding priorities, we really look to support comprehensive healthcare service delivery models that specifically care for adults with IDD. We do some support of inclusive medical education curriculum and some support for the use of supported decision-making within healthcare settings. Saying all that, Wiki Education seems different, but I think in WIS's perspective of this work, we acknowledge that Wikipedia is a healthcare resource and a healthcare tool, and something that we consider a core value, meaning that it's throughout our grant making, is we look to support programs that specifically engage adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities as experts and leaders. And I think that is something that is strongly aligned with the work of Wiki Education through the Scholars and Scientists program, that y'all are specifically looking to engage adults with IDD or scholars with disabilities in this process. Y'all also work to engage researchers with disabilities, as well as medical professionals that have provided care to adults with IDD. So there's strong alignment in the way you're approaching this work. It's very much in line with how we like to see the work done, and it also acknowledges that Wikipedia is a healthcare resource and tool. We know that when you can better inform families and their loved ones that experience disability, it does result in better healthcare. It's from our perspective of, we have a self-advocate advisory committee that are co-decision makers in our grant making. And if they were here, they talk about, we all know we've been to a doctor's office not understood something they've said to us and turned to Wikipedia. It happens. So I think our support of this work just acknowledges that and acknowledges what a powerful tool Wikipedia is when it comes to healthcare information.
Yes, and Ryan, I think you hit the nail on the head there and there's actually been multiple studies done demonstrating that Wikipedia is very commonly used as a healthcare resource for folks. And it's funny that you said like we've all been to a doctor's office where they use a term and we go look it up. I've heard of several instances where somebody will be at a doctor's office and the doctor will go to Wikipedia to like double check something. So it's not just the patients, but the professionals as well who are consulting Wikipedia, which is why it's so important to have that content be as good as it can be. And the other thing I just wanted to follow up on what you said, it's not just about improving that content on Wikipedia that deals with IDD and healthcare, but it's about getting people with those lived experiences to edit Wikipedia. And this is something that we really focus on at Wiki Education, not just in the field of disability, but we try to diversify and improve content on Wikipedia and fill in these knowledge equity gaps by also engaging a much more diverse group of editors. So I think that, and those two go hand in hand. So thank you for pointing both of those realities out because I think they're incredibly important. Okay, Diana, the next question is for you to kind of address, but again, if other panelists have anything to add, please feel free to jump in. So you participated, as you mentioned, Diana, you participated in one of our disability editing workshops, actually funded by the WITH Foundation. So as a professor of nursing, could you tell us a little bit about what you think the role of Wikipedia is and can be in training healthcare professionals in general, but also in training them specifically in disability access and care?
Okay, so first, I think, well, I know that there are some educators who already use Wikipedia, just like you spoke about the Scholars and Scientists program. As I've learned more about that myself, and I've considered, how can I bridge this and bring it into my own work with my own students? That's really exciting to think about the opportunities that are there for teaching students, not just about disabilities, but also the lived experiences, and then bringing it into a didactic framework that the students can then take into their clinical experiences. So there's a lot of opportunity there because, as many of us know as scholars, our textbooks don't always capture information in the most accurate or really in the most useful of ways. And so I think a lot of what can happen is educators, particularly nurses and other healthcare providers, need to be educated about how we can leverage Wikipedia, like Ryan spoke to, learning where the information is and recognizing that often, hopefully, folks with lived experiences are contributing to it, which can then help healthcare providers to reach their patients in meaningful ways rather than in stereotypical, less effective or sometimes even alienating ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and in addition to our work with, with our scholars and scientists classes with Foundation, we actually have kind of a separate initiative to work more closely with medical and health professional schools, I think, to achieve exactly what you're talking about, to kind of meet patients where they are. And we have one of our longtime medical faculty kind of always says that medical students or health professional students are kind of really well positioned to adding that content to Wikipedia because like they're not so far along in their careers that they're buried in jargon, but they're like, familiar enough with the material that they can actually make pretty meaningful edits. So I always like that. So I think that's absolutely right. Kind of like let's meet patients where they are. Awesome. Thanks, Diana. Terri, the next question is for you. So you came to Wiki Education, as you mentioned previously, as a faculty in our Wikipedia student program. Um, and again, so that what that means is that your students are writing for Wikipedia as an assignment in one of your disability studies classes. Could you tell us why you decided to join this program, why you think the work is important, and could you talk a little bit about maybe the types of content that your students have edited on Wikipedia?
Yeah, so like I said, we came to this project led by Dr. Perkins and supported by Dr. Perkins. So that was really, really super helpful. And then found out that Wikipedia has its own support, which is also super helpful. So, so that's been great for us. Our students have edited all kinds of articles, and they value the training that comes before they get to edit. So they like the Wikipedia assignments better than, let's say, okay, everyone write an essay on some certain topic. Well, they like the freedom of choice in the Wikipedia assignments. They like that there's scaffolding. They like that there's office hours and resources that they can reach out to. But we also talk about the articles. We talk and talk and talk in our classes about how is it going? Where are you stumbling? How can we be helpful? Let's get in some groups and talk about different kinds of articles. So let's make groups where nobody has the same topic. And so it's been just tremendous for kind of team building, for trust building, for community building in the class, and then knowledge building like throughout the process. And then we always have the presentations at the end of class. So or whenever the project ends. And it's really been lovely to see the students have so much confidence in what they're saying and be so proud of what they've done. And then, a little while later, I don't know, just a few days later, it seems like we get this message and we go online as a class and they see how many zillion times their articles have been looked at, and they're without fail, their jaws drop to the floor and they gasp in amazement. And I love that for them. And so that's kind of how that has gone for us.
That's so lovely to hear, Terri. And I think, so I actually I actually work on the Wikipedia student program, and so that's certainly not the first time that I've heard that reaction, especially when they start to see like how many times their work has been viewed. Because again, right, for most students, right, that they're used to writing a term paper that one professor, maybe a TA reads, and that's it. Where this lives beyond the class, and often faculty will even say like, my students' work has been viewed like, a million more times than any of my peer-reviewed published material has been reviewed. So it's just an incredibly meaningful experience. Terri, I'm actually just a little bit curious here. Have your students like have they had any challenges at all or working in disability studies? So sometimes knowledge equity areas in Wikipedia can be a little more challenging to work with, just because the sourcing can be a little bit more challenging. So I'm curious if they've had any of those challenges. If so, how did they overcome those? And if they haven't, that's great as well. And I'm glad to hear that.
So I think that's a great question. Thank you. It really depends on the student and what they've chosen. So oftentimes a student who is taking one of our classes has a disability or multiple disabilities, and so that's what draws a lot of students to this area. And so a lot of times they will find an article about something that they already are familiar with. And so in editing that, they don't find too many challenges as a rule. But then we sometimes encourage them to find a different article, find a different topic, learn something new. And sometimes that challenge can be a real challenge. Particularly when a student comes in and says, I have disability X, so I want to study about disability X. And we say, how about you know a lot about disability X? Let's study disability 43. And they're like, oh, wait, I don't know how to do that. And so that's when the training really becomes important. And that's when we encourage them to dive into that aspect. But they haven't had challenges that were insurmountable in real life. Some of the challenges have seemed insurmountable to a couple of students in the beginning, but then, we work together, we take the journey, and they have support in the classroom as well as support on Wikipedia. So we've never once had a student say, this was a worthless assignment. I didn't get to study what I wanted, so this doesn't mean anything to me, or even make any kind of comments in our evaluations like that, or even so when they have the opportunity to have anonymity, they don't say anything negative either. So I think that speaks really highly of the experience for the students.
I love that you have the students, write about the things that they're familiar with, which can be like really meaningful, right? Like if they're improving on the article on a disability that they're experiencing, right? It kind of gets at what we've been talking about, that they have this lived experience and they can kind of write about it in a way that's really representative. But I love that you're kind of pushing them out of their comfort zone as well. So I think that's really great. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, Terri has mentioned multiple times training. So Wiki Education, where we come in here, is that we have a whole suite of training materials and resources that students and faculty and anybody participating in our programs has access to train them on different aspects of editing Wikipedia and successfully adding content to Wikipedia. So, again, Skylar earlier mentioned all those different terms, and Wikipedia can be kind of a complicated space. And so that's where we come in to kind of ease folks into editing Wikipedia and helping them to do it confidently. So thanks so much, Terri and Montreux. Okay, Skylar, the next question is for you. And I think you definitely touched on a lot of this in your initial thoughts about how you joined Wikipedia, but maybe we can go a little bit deeper here. So as you mentioned, you're if not super active right now, but you're a longtime editor of Wikipedia, really joined it from like the early days. So I was wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit more about your Wikipedia editing journey, but also if you could talk about like maybe go into more detail about how your blindness has either affected or impacted your Wikipedia editing experience. And I really would love to hear more about your thoughts on, how to get more folks with disabilities editing Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's as I said, I generally found it to be a welcoming community at the start. It was a bit smaller and maybe easier for people to get to know each other a bit. But I definitely noticed over time that the expectations for how you add sources. So when I was saying references before, what I meant was that adding sources, that became a lot more difficult, and for a good reason, because we want the Wikipedia articles to be well sourced. One of the best ways to use Wikipedia, in fact, is to look into the sources for yourself after you read the article. But not only were they expecting a source for each sentence or two in a high quality Wikipedia article, but the format that they needed to be in became a lot different. And that is a major barrier. So like right now, for example, for the American Foundation for the Blind Wikipedia article, they still have the wrong president. The president from years ago is still listed as the president. But in order for anybody to change that, someone has to take the time to find a reference for the new president being there. And so I'm like, okay, I really need to do this, but I'm having a busy day every day, and this is never the day when I want to feel like doing that. Now, ChatGPT and some other AI sources can actually format references for you, which at least takes away a couple of the steps. Now, of course, there's going to be a bigger, broader conversation about AI that we probably don't have time for today, where some people are even using AI and for things that they would have used Wikipedia for. But that said, I do see that possibly increasing disability inclusion. The other question is, what should people start out editing about? Like, if I think about the causes of blindness and I look at their Wikipedia articles for like my condition, Leber's amaurosis, or Usher syndrome, or retinitis pigmentosa that have more complicated systems, that I would say those are decent articles. They have more medical content than I personally am aware of. I don't really have anything to add. I think for it is though worth having people with each condition check over those articles and at least provide a bit more feedback. And there possibly are some things that could be added about experiences of what it's like to have those diseases that are a little bit less in the medical field and more in the cultural field, if that makes sense. There also are a lot of people who are notable within the blind culture who do not have yet Wikipedia articles. So that's the blindness area where I've edited more about organizations for the blind and access technology for the blind, where there are even new articles that could be created or much more expansive content to those articles. And I did happen to hear the chat question coming in about how you can not have references. I think that the references are out there. It just takes more effort to make sure that whatever book or academic journal article or blog can get to the right content area and be used for what you want it to be used for the point that you're trying to make in the article.
You touched on so many great points here, Skylar, and I think like, well, no, one of the challenges of like sometimes writing in these fields where about subjects and populations that are just haven't been written about as much as is they haven't been written about as much, and so Wikipedia at the end of the day is about sourcing, and so like if society at large isn't writing about the contributions of blind folks or blindness organizations or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to, anything, right? It's going to be more difficult to get those topics onto Wikipedia.
Right.
Right. And so like, and that's the challenge. And again, it's not insurmountable, right? It requires a little more digging. And that's where Wiki Education really tries to get folks, digging deeper into those sources.
Right.
So we
And
can
it's
get that
hard.
content.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And like some of it is uneven. Like there actually are like the
Mhm.
category for blind musicians, blind writers, like it's a big
Mhm.
category. I've certainly learned about lots of people I never would have known about without Wikipedia.
Mhm.
And of course, some of the articles are great. And of course, the celebrities like Stevie Wonder and Helen Keller are probably going to have decent articles. But yet
Right.
there is so much more that like I'd really like. I don't know if any of you, Helaine, if you've read The Country of the Blind book by Andrew Leland. Uh, like I think he's someone who probably deserves a Wikipedia article that I would like to do if I had time.
Right. I'm a little bit familiar with it, but
Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. And and Wikipedia, just as a reminder, is a volunteer-based community. And so this is why it's so important to have a really diverse group of people editing Wikipedia, because people write about the things that they're interested in and that they're drawn to. And somebody without a disability might not be really interested in writing about those topics. Not to say that you can only write about disability topics if you have a disability, but it again, because of this volunteer nature, people are going to write about the things that they're drawn to, that they're interested in. And so that's why it's so critical that we have a diverse population contributing to Wikipedia. So we just get a much more representative sample of knowledge. By the way, the AI, and so you mentioned AI, Skylar, so that actually leads me into my next and final question here before we actually pivot to the Q&A. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the AI topic is incredibly complicated. We could have an entire speaker series on Wikipedia and generative AI. And in fact, we have had such a series. And
Oh, good.
so, but there's actually lots of really interesting things happening in AI and accessibility, which again is like a whole other thing. So I'm really curious to hear more about all of your thoughts. But so my final question, and this is to all of you, is I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that things like social media and generative AI have dramatically changed the way we are consuming, producing, and accessing information in a relatively short amount of time. What role do you all think Wikipedia can play in sort of the context of the changing nature of the way we're accessing information? What role do you think Wikipedia can play for disabled communities? But kind of at a broader level in the way disability is constructed, I think on a more societal level. Do any of you want to go first? Skylar, maybe do you want to, since you already started talking about that?
Sure. Yeah. Can you repeat the question a bit?
Yeah, like what role, in this dramatically and very fast-paced environment in the way that we're, consuming and producing information, what role do you think Wikipedia can play kind of moving forward in this current
Oh,
information landscape? Yeah, for disabled
for
communities.
Wikipedia. Yeah.
Yeah, for disabled
Yeah.
communities.
I think it's again, it can be a source that can add some context to a lot of disability studies, whether it comes to medical conditions or culture and things like that. And I'm hoping that it will be considered to be more trustworthy because it is being put together by humans rather than AI. What the two have in common is that they're both meant to provide summaries of a topic as it is. Like instead of a particular book, which might be a perspective of one person, maybe on a more narrower topic, as many books and blog articles and social media posts are. And AI is going to be much better when it comes to things like image descriptions or answering very specific questions or writing tools or things like that. But Wikipedia, in many cases, is still going to provide a more thorough summary of what should be known about the topic, as long as we continue to keep the articles high quality. And I have seen, and of course, depending on how much we know about the topic, it is a bit harder to evaluate how high quality something is. So that's why we need to keep, variety of people on board, as we've all been saying. And yeah, so hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I kind of think like this is I think about this a lot too, that like, what role will Wikipedia have in this, sort of brave new world of generative AI? And I think it is still a human curated community with human curated content. And I think that has real value and will continue to have that value. Terri,
Right.
do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we actually had the opportunity to teach a class last time called The Social Construction of Disability. And we started out by offering students, like we took them through a tour of the syllabus and all these perfect, great, applicable, lovely articles that they were going to get to read in each module. And then we said, but as a social construction, so that's what AI is. AI scrubs the world and socially constructs its knowledge. And guess what? All of these readings were socially constructed. Each one of them came from AI. Now, if anyone can find the article, any of these articles, they can have an A in the class and they can leave today with an A in the class and never have to even come back. So they all went and tried to find the articles because it was the first day of class. And guess what? None of those articles existed because they were all AI generated. And so their task became to find appropriate articles that they could substitute for the fake ones that don't exist.
Yeah.
And maybe they would like to start, you know, by looking at something that had references. Oh, maybe we could call that Wikipedia to begin. So we kind of tried to bridge some of AI's good stuff with some of its ridiculousness and just give the students kind of a heads up about why the assignment that they were going to do that they saw in the syllabus that had to do with Wikipedia, why it just started that whole conversation about the importance of citations that are actually real citations and articles that really exist in the world. So that was just an example of how we did it last time. And it was a lot of fun too. The students were great sports about it. And it was really kind of a fun, kind of cool start to the class.
I love that activity, Terry. And I think like, you know, I think the real beauty of the Wikipedia assignment that your students and you are participating in is that like it really does get students thinking about how they access information and how they like know something's reliable and real, right? I mean, it's becoming like a really big question and becoming increasingly difficult. So I love that you're like really challenging them to kind of think about like where their information is coming from and to really corroborate that information, that source is a real source of information. And I think AI does have some really interesting use cases, especially when it comes to like I mentioned, like accessibility and Skylar, you alluded to some of this, but at the end of the day, that ability to kind of dig down into sourcing and distinguish what's like a reliable source from what's not a reliable source. It's like such an
Yeah.
incredibly important skill.
Yeah. And some AI engines will have sources, but some of
Yeah.
them, like AI has even made up sources, and it's made up
Yes.
like things that didn't happen.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. And that's one of the challenges like with using things like generative AI to edit Wikipedia, right? Is that like, it might be able to craft like a decent looking Wikipedia article. But at the end of the day, the sourcing is like the real challenge. Absolutely. Diana or Ryan, do you have anything to add about sort of, the role that you think Wikipedia can play in this ever-changing landscape of information with things like social media and generative AI?
And I think what Skylar and Terri have both said really say everything that I could even imagine to begin saying. I mean, it was so eloquent. And so I think it really is understanding, that Wikipedia is our sourcing space, and AI can help us to summarize and, put ideas together in some ways. But truly, that human experience and the information that appears in Wikipedia is going to be and should be held to a higher value.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left here to the session. Do you folks have any questions for our panelists? Please feel free to put those into the chat or into the Q&A. Colleen, was there anything there right now, or is it?
I actually have a question I'd love to start with Ryan on, if you don't mind, Ryan, and then hear from everyone. And it weaves together a lot of the things that we've talked about today, but I think it'll be great. So what changes would you most like to see in the information landscape regarding disability at this particular moment? So we've talked about Wikipedia, we've talked about sources, but if we pull back, that's what I'm getting is, in terms of the big picture, what kind of changes would you like to see? And you all are, personal and professional advocates in your unique roles. So I really like this question.
I think we've all kind of touched on it in different ways, but in general, I would like to see a more holistic view of disability and the disability experience. When you're looking at information, especially traditional information that scholars and scientists haven't already enhanced, it can come from a kind of incomplete picture of what disability is. And I think many of us are very familiar with sometimes families will find out something from their medical provider. They'll go to different resources, and it doesn't really give a complete picture of what that disability experience is. So I think whatever we can do to make sure that we're providing a more holistic view that includes especially the expertise of folks that experience that disability is going to be helpful for everyone. I feel like in many ways, the same evolution that medical education curriculum is going through is needed for healthcare information in general, making sure that we're engaging folks who experience that disability in the actual development to enhance that information. And also, I'd like to just uplift from my perspective something that's already been touched on, but I think it would be beneficial to have more information about current leaders, current folks that are doing work in disability and doing some important advocacy, especially the leaders and perspectives that maybe don't get as much shine as, say, a head of a healthcare foundation. And I'm speaking specifically of if there are ways that we could make sure that we're highlighting the work and leadership of women and people of color with disabilities. I think the more that we can be intentional in making sure that we're providing information about other leaders, other people doing this work, the better off the entire disability community is, and the more society will be able to be more inclusive of people with disabilities in general.
Wonderful. Oh, you're getting some claps. I saw a lot of heads nodding on that one. I would love to hear from all of you. If you're waving
Yeah,
a magic wand, and what kind of changes would you like to see? Skylar, do you want to go ahead?
right. Yeah, I definitely agree with all of what Ryan said. There's maybe one distinction here. It's like there's certain information that would be really nice to have for specialists. As a blindness history nerd, I would love for there to be more information about why did the Federation and the Council split in 1961 and what were all the ins and outs of that. But when it comes to the information that the majority of people need, I think in addition to all of what Ryan said, there needs to be more information about how disability services actually work. Like I think many of us, even myself, as what I thought was a pretty strong advocate, there was a lot that I didn't know about what Medicare covered and what the Department of Education covered before a lot of the most recent cuts and the threats of cuts. And maybe if more of us had known more about that, that's one significant reason why things have gotten so bad. I'm not sure if it would be worth restructuring articles in some way or just finding a way to keep that at the forefront.
Fantastic. Thanks for that perspective, Skylar. That's really helpful. Diana or Terri, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, if we had a magic wand, I think it would be kind of cool to maybe have like categories that people could look up any disability they wanted to. So that means every single disability, because this is a magic wand, every single disability is represented and represented robustly. But people could look up cultural information. How is what one culture calls a disability, how is that lived experience different if you're in another culture who doesn't view it as a disability at all? So I would love to see there be categories about culture, categories about like age, what is going on when the person is 3 years old versus when they're 30 years old, and things like that, like timelines, that kind of give a picture of how the disability often, but not always, travels. And I would love to see all the culture in it. So thanks.
Thanks, Terri. That's great. Yeah. Diana, anything left to add?
I think what I would love to see, I love the idea, Terri, of having a magic wand. I think what I would love to see, and this is probably a space that I'm speaking from with complete lack of knowledge because I've not used Wikipedia in this way. As a healthcare provider, being able to type in any experience, any disability, and being able to understand what are the most important things that I can do to help my patient or my student who's experiencing this? How can I show up for them and support them in a way that gives me some direction before I interact with that person to kind of anticipate some needs, but to ask the right questions so that I can figure out how can I meet you where you are the best that I can right now? How can I engage you with a true human spirit of support and not stereotyping you and lumping you in with a group of other folks? I think that would be the magic
Absolutely.
wish.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that perspective from the provider lens, I think is something so valuable to bring up as we kind of think about the greater information landscape and touching on the way that people engage with Wikipedia across, all groups and all people. We just have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to ask each of you to make your last answer to this last question pretty short and succinct. What makes you hopeful about the future of disability representation on Wikipedia? Terri, hands up, ready to go.
Opportunities like this. Opportunities like this to share, to educate, to open up, the landscape, like you said, to travel the landscape together more often and more deeply. Thanks. Thanks.
I'll jump in and say from my perspective, what makes me hopeful is that I know from our previous work with the Scholars and Scientists program, when y'all referred to the fact that millions of people see the information, that is very truthful. I hear from our medical providers that have been through the program that they're shocked by just how many people view the information. It also gives them a space to finally put that information, things they've known about the patients they're serving, their kind of tricks of the trade. It gives a repository for that perspective, that information. I'm also hopeful that as more scholars with disabilities are able to contribute to the platform, that again, it gives that holistic picture of disability so that we all know, especially of those of us who were born with disabilities, that when our loved ones and our families are looking up information, that the information they receive aren't from a place of fear, but represent a complete picture. So the fact that scholars are able to make those contributions makes me tremendously hopeful. And I do think that this work will ultimately help foster a more inclusive society for everyone. So I'm tremendously hopeful in that respect.
Wonderful. Skylar, what makes you hopeful about the future?
But I've seen a lot of growth in disability representation on Wikipedia. I'm less sure about disabled editors, although there are a few other blind editors like myself. But when I was looking at the medical content related to blindness, I feel like I could, in good conscience, recommend it to people from my own limited knowledge. It seems to line up with what people would want to be looking for when it comes to the causes of different conditions, the limited treatment options available, the different types, that kind of thing. And when it comes to cultural representation, if you want to look up a list of blind musicians or blind authors, that category is out there. And I've even come across, when I've been looking someone on Wikipedia, that I didn't even know had a disability. It's really interesting to see that information out there and just come up organically. So of course, a lot more work to be done, but there's a lot of growth too.
That's really great to hear. Thanks for sharing that. Diana, anything making you hopeful?
This panel has made me hopeful. I've learned so much. So I have no notes to add. Everyone really hit the high points.
Wonderful. We'll toss it back to Helaine to wrap us up. Thanks all.
Yeah. Thanks, Colleen. And I agree with Diana. This panel has made me hopeful. As I mentioned, I'm here, with my professional Wiki Education cap on, but I've also got my personal cap on here as well, somebody living with a disability. And just so much of what you said really spoke to me on a personal level. So thank you all. You've made me more hopeful. Thank you again so much to Ryan, Diana, Terri, Montreux, and Skylar for joining us today. This has been such a wonderful experience. Thank you all for the work that you have done and are doing in support of the work at Wiki Education. If you are interested in learning more about our programs, please check out the links that Colleen is putting here in the chat to participate in both our Scholars and Scientists program as well as our Wikipedia student program. And please join us for upcoming speaker series. Check out which ones will be next. Thank you again to everyone for coming today.